recent U.S. military operations, and she'll talk more about where exactly she served and her responsibilities. And then we have my uncle, Albert Smith, from New Mexico, and he served in World War II as a Navajo code talker. I guess we'll just go chronologically, starting with World War II, and have my uncle Albert Smith share his experiences and responsibilities as a Navajo code talker. Yeah. Do you want to have it?
Good morning, boys and girls, men and women.
Good morning.
I see so many young ones helping on the mixtures. The Navajo code talker has been going on for over 60 years now, wearing us out, being called on every now and then. It's an interesting topic, I guess, if you haven't been in any conflict. Can all of you hear me? Yes. Okay, thank you. Sometimes I have a little difficulty talking, but I can manage. I've been doing this for quite some time, since the last conflicts. Has gotten to me a little bit, but I'm still hanging on. The life that you lead depends upon you, upon your interests. I was looking over the city. I grew up passing through here from 1970 all the way back to Oregon, sometimes every year, sometimes twice a year. I grew up with the freeway, your freeway. And now I see some of the structures changing, the major structures changing in your city. Being a serviceman, that's a satisfying adventures. To see how people observe what we, as part of a code talker, we think about. And that is a portion of a total human, which you being a part of it, and we turn that over to you to see how you take care of it, what responsibilities you hold as a treasure. which keeps us getting older. But that as a treasurer, we help. It's like a bank. So that's a pleasure and pleasing to us. We got into this coat talker business because the Americans, you know what they did? They sold the secret information to the Japanese. And ever since, when they were young, I guess, the Japanese knew that they could get back at the Americans for that. They used the Morse code against them. The Japanese already knew what was happening. They knew what the Americans were planning. They had nothing to hide. So, in 1 year period, after they bombed Pearl Harbor, it took the Japanese to occupy all the major Pacific islands, from Japan to Australia. They were bombing Australia, and they had made a couple landings in Alaska. They couldn't stop them. And so they called upon us. Somehow, we were at that time the largest tribe in the United States. They didn't have a written language about us, so we turned our language into the military language. We use everything except our kitchen sink. We use the names of planes and associated with animals. The planes for the birds, because the bombs get carried by the plane. So those planes go together. It's easy to remember. And they took the names of the ships and put it together with the fishes. When they had little trouble fitting a word to that, was the submarine. What do we call a submarine?
Fish tank.
Oh, somebody came up with it saying, well, they just call an iron fish. That stuck with it. So sometimes when I'm talking about people where they do a lot of fishing, I ask them, have you ever caught an iron fish? No response to that. We had a turtle named after tanks. And we fit the word for word the American military language to the Navajo language. Because we grew up with the Navajo language, we played a lot of games with it. So that during the combat, we would communicate for the various sources of needs, the front lines. when a combat is going. And the Japanese tried everything, every way to disturb us, even intercept our wavelength, communication, disturbance. But we always went to different equipment, different size equipment. That's how we communicated with each other. There were 420 Navajos that used the code out of 500 that went in to try out for the code school. Over 100 of them couldn't handle the code because of limited Navajo language or limited English language, and some were not that interested in the work. So they couldn't control that, and they had to go into the regular service. Many of us stayed for 4 combat tours at various islands, all the way. After a year of the military trying to stop the Japanese, we finally did. We got as far as Australia. They were bombing Australia when the code was put to work. And they had made a landing in Alaska. They were too far stretched out from the homelands, so they had to withdraw from Alaska, and the movement beyond Australia never completed. Some of the Navajos had trouble being with the headhunters close to Australia. But they managed to get acquainted. We didn't lose any Navajos over the headhunters. Other than that, we made the movement. We took island after islands all the way back to Japan. And I was on Tinian, where they kept the atomic bombs. There was a major airfield where they had B-29 and larger planes for landing. If you ever made a tour to Tinian, you'll notice 2 little holes on the side of the runway. That's where the 2 atomic bombs were kept before they dropped the bomb, took it to Japan. I guess they wanted to test to see if the Japanese were strong enough with all that fighting. So after they dropped the first bomb, I heard that they asked them, "Have you had enough?" No answer. So they went, flew another one, the second bomb. That's when they finally answered, "Yes, we've had enough." So that ended the war. And I kept thinking about the type of men that we were fighting. Up to that time, the Japanese servicemen, when they went into service to defend their country, that was their life. And no coming home. The at our possibility. But so now, if you go to Japan, you see some men living by themselves. Why? Because when they went to war, they left their spiritual life of the family. They left their country. They left their families. They have no one to return to because it was a disgrace for a serviceman to come home. So imagine, I haven't been back to Japan since, my last tour of Japan. I haven't seen those men that came back from China. There were some men that were, some Japanese that were captured in China and they were returned home. How they're living, I don't know. But one thing I guess, changed a little, the style of the military men in Japan. That is, they don't have their last picnic, their last supper with their families before going to war. That is the kind of men we fought. They weren't ready to, and some of you went to some of those airfield hangars. You see the Japanese at that time, you'd see some Japanese hanging up on a tied up beam because their life had been spent being tied up. They had to use both of their hands, and that's why they were tied up. And they were killed that way. So those lives are changing. Servicemen, I guess, if you listen, since you are historians, you'll notice the changes of men throughout the world. There's still some warriors. No matter at what age. Some of the changes, not only traveling. Somehow I got stuck in Taipei one time. We were making a tour of making films out in the Pacific Islands. So got to Okinawa. They had no plane coming from there to United States. So they said, go on over to Taipei, you catch a plane from there. Surprising, it's an old bomber. And every now and then, flying across the Pacific, hit the various current. The old plane would shake like this every now and then. The wind would come up, thought the bottom would fall out pretty soon. But that didn't happen. All the way across, instead of coming straight across, like the regular plane, it went all the way towards Canada, and then came down the coast, got back to LA. So those are some of my experiences And you historians, you'll notice that the tides of life changes. Some have to be done through wars. That's how stubborn some of us are.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we have time for Q&A and Rachel too. But thanks so much for sharing that. Okay, so just to, I know I felt bad cutting off. Just can always hear so much. But yeah, just to make sure we have time for Rachel to share her experiences in more recent military conflicts and allow some Q&A too, okay? You got it.
I have to tell you, I was mostly excited to come to hear the Navajo Code Talkers talk, so I'm really honored to be here in your presence. I served 11 years in the Army, and I did 2 tours to Iraq. The first time I was a mechanic, and I was with an engineer unit, and so we finished building the only highway from north to south Iraq. And so I worked on a lot of not John Deere equipment, but a lot of Caterpillar equipment, and I worked on a lot of Humvees, and that for me was a really boring tour. We were about 5 miles south of Nasiriyah, which is where Jessica Lynch had been captured. And there wasn't a lot that went on down there. I think during the whole year that I was there, we were only bombed 1 time. And so for me, I was it was boring. We had a 9-to-5 job, and then there's nothing to do. If you're not working, you're just kind of hanging out. So I read, I think, more books that year than I have my whole life put together. I was home for about a year, and then I went on my second tour, which was a security forces tour. And so we were the guns for all the stuff we were transporting from camp to camp. And so we would be in convoys, about 30 vehicles long, and between every 3 to 5 civilian vehicles, we would have a Humvee or an ASV. I had no idea what an ASV was until I was put on this tour, but it's kind of like a little tank on wheels. And it's got about 5 inches of armor, and the windows are about 3 inches thick even. There's a big turret on the top, and 3 to 4 people can fit inside of it. And because of the amount of armor and how heavy it was, we always put that in front, because 90% of the time, it's the front truck that gets hit by the roadside bombs, because most of them are pressure detonated. And so for the first few months, I was the driver for the convoy commander. And so I was about 3 vehicles back, which is still in front of the civilian vehicles at that time. And so we always traveled at night. There is a curfew there, so the Iraqis weren't supposed to be out after a certain hour in the daytime. So you knew if there's someone on the road, they're already kind of breaking the rules. And we had warning signals and things like that before we ever used any kind of force on them. And so we'd be on the road sometimes 17 hours a night, and we'd sleep for a few hours and then get ready to go again. It took us about 3 to 4 hours to prepare, just to get our vehicles and make sure our weapons were loaded and make sure our fuel tanks were full, make sure we had addressed any problems as far as headlights being out or anything like that. And that was the really exciting tour. That time I was in Balad, which is kind of in the middle of Iraq, and we got bombed numerous times a day when we were in camp. And there's always bunkers and things we could run to if we wanted to, but a lot of times we were so tired that we didn't care. And so we waited until things started shaking in our rooms and stuff would fall off our lockers before we would make the effort to get out into a bunker, which I never did. And we traveled almost to Turkey, and we traveled into Kuwait a few times. So we covered a lot of bases. And I would say probably 3/4 of our company were probably injured, and there was about 3 people that all ended up not coming home. And one of those was my squad leader, and he always wanted to be up front. He always wanted to lead the way. And so he was always in the front gun truck, and we were the first platoon out of a camp that night, going back home. And he got hit by a roadside bomb that was able to, right where the front axle is in those ASVs, it was a very weak spot in the ASV. And so the bomb blew a hole in the bottom of the vehicle and came in between the driver and the lead vehicle commander. And so those 2 men went home. My squad leader died, so he went home in a different way. But the guy that he was training to be lead vehicle commander was 19. And he had severe injuries, and when he went home, he couldn't handle the emotional scars of it, and he later died. And the gunner that manned the turret in the back, he was an older man, and he was really gung-ho, as he would say. And he stayed, and he loved his job. And then I had to fight to take over that position because I'm a girl. And I had a son at home, and they would say, the guys would tell me that I couldn't be up there because I was a mother. And I said, well, you're a dad. Are you saying that being a mom is more important than being a dad? And no man would ever admit to that. No Army guy anyway would admit to that. And so I had to really fight to get there. But once I got there, I actually ended up getting an award for finding the most roadside bombs. And they came in all, you never could tell somebody what they looked like, because it could be a tire on the side of the road or a pile of fresh dirt. Or you couldn't see it at all, and there'd just be something coming out of a pothole. And so I missed 2, and my vehicle got hit 2 separate times by roadside bombs. And they're obviously, minor. No one ever got, hurt too bad from the 2 that I missed. How much time do I have? Am I still good?
You can have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes.
Yeah.
As far as being security forces, there was probably, on the camp that I stayed in the second time, there was probably about 15,000 people that were stationed there. And maybe 3,000 people ever left that base while they were there. And I was in a platoon that left about every night. Our platoon was the smallest platoon, and part of us were always put out on details, putting new armor on the vehicles or doing something that we were assigned to do. We had watchtowers that sometimes half of our platoon was assigned to do, and we'd usually put what we would call the pogues out there. The ones that you wouldn't really trust with your life. We'd keep them on the details, and the rest of us would go out just about every night. And our trips would last maybe a night to up to a few weeks. So once we were home, we always had we had a room, we had a little trailer, a 2-man trailer that we were able to stay in. But if we were out, we stayed in tents, and half of them did not have air conditioning, and it gets to 130 degrees over there. So trying to sleep in the middle of the day inside a tent when it's 130 degrees outside is not the easiest. I know it's very different than what a lot of the media portrays, or even movies portray. I never had to eat one of the Army meals, the MREs. We always had chow halls, and there's even Pizza Huts and Taco Bells on camp. There's always Burger King, always Burger King. And I really think that the military does try as hard as it can to keep your spirits up, and some camps will have bowling alleys, and there's always tons of gyms if you need to work out. A couple places had pools. I was lucky to be on Balad because it used to be an Iraqi Air Force base, and so we had an indoor pool and an outdoor pool, and they were both huge Olympic-sized pools. They have internet cafes, so we can try to call home and get online, and a lot of people ordered everything they could possibly order. The PXs there was our general store, kind of, and you can buy everyone. The biggest thing is TVs and the newest games that were out. There's movies. So I think the military does really try as hard as it can to keep your spirits up. I think great.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to allow some time for anyone in class to ask any question directed to either Albert Smith or Rachel Kirby here. Anyone have some? Yeah, Taylor.
What was your most memorable experience?
My most memorable experience is
Stay over here.
one time I woke up and I just knew today was my day. I knew today was the day that I was not going to be around anymore. And I just kept having this feeling over and over. And I still went to the motor pool. I was getting my truck ready, and I just kept having this feeling. And what do? You can't tell anybody. They think you're nuts. And so I think, okay, well, what do I need to do? And I thought of my son, and I said, no, I wrote him a letter that if I didn't come back, he can open it and he can read it, and I've told him everything I need to tell him. And then I thought I need to repent, because I'm not a good person. But I thought, no, you can't do that just because you know you're going, but God knows I'm trying. And then I said, okay, well, that's it. There's nothing more for me to do. And so as we were leaving, we call it leaving the wire when we leave camp. We left the wire, and I knew we were going through a really hot zone where we always get attacked. We always get shot at. There's always bombs. There's always something going on. And I was in charge. I was leading the convoy. And we have these spotlights all over the front of our vehicle. And so my eyes were glued to where the lights turned into the darkness. And we traveled about 50 miles an hour. And I just remember thinking, I gotta see this bomb. I just knew it was a bomb. That's how it always is the majority of the time. I just kept thinking, I gotta see it. And then I thought, it doesn't matter if I see it. My driver has to see it. And I just kept hearing this voice, it's coming closer, Rachel, it's coming. And then I saw this giant pothole and I saw the edge of a box, a black box in there. And then I saw 2 wires that went out to my right side. And thank goodness my driver did see it, and he swerved the other way, and I got on the radio and told everyone to stop. And what it was 2 155 artillery rounds were in this pothole, and the black box was the battery box. It was the pressure line was a backup in case the radio didn't work. The radio remote control. And each of our vehicles has a big box on it that scrambles anything that's not US, which is why the remote wouldn't have worked. And there's also a 2-liter bottle full of, I always say it wrong, I think it's accelerant, and it melts the armor within seconds before the bomb gets in. So the bomb will blow, and within those few milliseconds, that liquid will melt through the armor and the bomb gets in. And so I was able to find that bomb, and I was able to live. But on our way back from that same route, there was another convoy, and all 3 of the people in their first vehicle died. So that was my most memorable experience.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? Robbie?
This is for Albert. Did you serve in Iwo Jima or Okinawa?
Did you serve in Iwo Jima or Okinawa?
Excuse me?
Have you served in Iwo Jima or Okinawa? What islands did you serve in? There you
I
go.
didn't get that far to Okinawa, but I was on Iwo Jima. That was my last one.
Okay. He was at Iwo Jima. Any specifics about that?
I have specifics.
Okay, would you like to elaborate? Yeah, Robbie.
So what were some of the codes that you did? What were some of the code of orders that you gave, or some of the codes that you gave across during your Iwo Jima?
What were some of the code orders that you gave in Iwo
If you
Jima?
remember specifics.
Do you remember what you were assigned? Here.
The code that I usually send are things that are needed from the front line, what things are weak, what reinforcements is needed, what casualties, how casualties are needed to be reserved or to be sent home or to be assisted, supplies, ammos, all that comes out. So we respond as much as possible. And then also, a lot of times we send out requests for additional strafing, bombing, and reinforcement of additional men. If there's weaknesses in penetration, and sometimes there's always disturbances. Things are not clearly being extended. And so those have to be mended. Any security, additional food, rations, whatnot, water, those come out in the fighting. Sometimes some of the men are in a hurry, and so they leave their water supply canteen somewhere, and so they ask for all that.
Are there any other questions? Oh, right in the middle. Sorry, what's your name? Madison?
Kayla.
Kayla.
Yeah, this is for both.
For both.
Could you describe like your general day, like how a normal day would be for you, like
asking, so you can hear, what was your general day like in the military, right? What was the general routine for your service? Do you want to answer first, Kate? I mean, Rachel.
While we're deployed, it's always, you wake up and you do the errands you're supposed to do, you get your truck ready, and then you take off, you head off, and then you sleep for however many hours you can, and then it starts over. But if you're not deployed, it's pretty boring. A lot of times on active duty, they'll send you home, or they'll give you some task of picking weeds or something like that.
Okay. How was your general day like in Iwo Jima, for example? 1942.
Your combat is different from your non-conflicting events on wherever you're at. In your combat services, there's no time setting. The only time that you have setting is when you're making a landing. You're up at 4 o'clock in the morning. At daylight, you're all your way in. You go in formations. You have assignment already set up. Everything has to be on schedule when you go in, because the enemy is going to throw everything at you. To defend means if you're fighting against a man who's not returning home, who does not, he wants to live, but he'll fight you to the end. There's no return for him, so he fights. Puts everything out. He goes in the ground. Like the first combat I went into was on one of the airfields. There were very limited forces during the fighting, landing. So we cleared the island in half a day. Went all the way around, cleared it, secured, and at night, the guards were surprised. They were being attacked from various sources. And where were the men all that day long? They were around the airfield in the drainage. That's where they were all day long. After we cleared the island, and they came out at night, cut your throat, do everything to kill you.
Yeah, that's
So we had to learn the hard way to find out what really were the basic life of our fighters.
Thanks. And one more question before we wrap up. Yeah, Peter?
This one's for Rachel.
Rachel?
You hear a lot in the media. What's the general sentiment of the Iraqi people towards the American soldiers?
Well, for me, it was always very good. They would kiss us, they would say thank you, they were always very happy. But at the same time, that's the scary part, because you never know. Those could be the same people that are attacking us at night. So we really, to us, they're very kind. But you can never be very trusting.
I really want to thank Rachel and Albert for coming and for sharing these experiences that are just really so powerful of what they went through, and really on behalf of our country, on behalf of each of us. And so I really want to thank them and show our great appreciation to them, that we are so grateful for their services that they have rendered to our country and for our safety and our defense. Albert is speaking, Mr. Albert Smith is speaking this evening at 6 p.m. and some of you will be involved with helping with that. So there are a few students I'd like to talk to, especially whoever is going to be in charge of the presentation on the background history of the Navajos this evening. I think I can catch you two after class. And if you have other involvement with today's activities, please see me just to check if you have any questions about that. All right. So please try and come to this evening